Marcus Chen had been running freight between star systems for 12 years, and in all that time he'd never questioned a delivery. Credits were credits, and asking too many questions was bad for business. The package sitting in his cargo hold was no different from thousands of others. A sealed container about the size of a briefcase, destination coordinates locked into his navigation system, payment already transferred to his account. The journey to the outer rim system of Kepler 442 would take 3 weeks through hyperspace. Marcus settled into his routine of ship maintenance, protein paste meals, and old Earth music that reminded him of home. His ship, the Wandering Star, wasn't much to look at, a modified cargo hauler with patched hull plating and engines that wheezed more than they hummed, but she'd never let him down. 2 days out from his destination, everything changed. The ship's proximity alarms shrieked as something massive dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of him. Marcus barely had time to slam the emergency brake thrusters before his ship would have collided with what appeared to be a derelict vessel of unknown design. The craft was enormous, easily 10 times the size of his ship, with smooth curves and an almost organic appearance that made his skin crawl. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, running scans on the vessel. The readings were impossible. The ship appeared to be made of materials that didn't exist in any database he had access to, and it was generating energy signatures that defied known physics. Most disturbing of all, it was drifting powerless in space, dark except for a faint pulse of blue light deep within its structure. Standard protocol dictated that he report the finding to the nearest authority and continue his delivery, but something about the vessel drew him in. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the prospect of salvage rights, or maybe it was just the loneliness of space travel making him reckless. Whatever the reason, Marcus found himself suiting up and preparing to board the alien craft. The airlock cycled with surprising efficiency for a supposedly dead ship. Inside, the corridors were vast and dimly lit by bioluminescent strips that pulsed with the same blue light he'd seen from outside. The architecture was wrong in ways that made his eyes water, angles that shouldn't exist, surfaces that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. But the atmosphere was breathable and gravity worked normally, so Marcus pressed deeper into the ship. He'd been exploring for nearly an hour when he found her. In what appeared to be the ship's central chamber, suspended in a crystalline pod filled with glowing fluid, was a being unlike anything he'd ever seen. She was humanoid but clearly alien, tall and elegant with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the pod's light. Her hair was white as starlight and moved as if underwater despite being contained in the fluid. Most striking were her eyes, which suddenly opened and fixed on him with an intensity that made him step backward. The pod began to drain, and alarms Marcus couldn't understand began sounding throughout the ship. Within minutes, the being had emerged, coughing up the strange fluid and collapsing to her knees. Without thinking, Marcus rushed to help her, pulling an emergency blanket from his suit pack and wrapping it around her shoulders. She looked up at him with those incredible eyes, a deep violet color that seemed to contain galaxies, and spoke in a language that sounded like music mixed with star wind. Marcus shook his head, not understanding, and activated his universal translator, but the device remained silent, unable to process her words. Frustrated, the being tried again, this time speaking slowly and carefully. Still nothing from the translator. She seemed on the verge of tears when Marcus, acting on instinct, repeated one of the phrases she'd been saying. He had no idea what it meant, but something about the way she'd said it made him want to try. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The being's eyes went wide with shock, and she scrambled backward as if he'd struck her. She spoke rapidly in her musical language, and this time the translator kicked in, though it seemed to struggle with the concepts. Impossible. The dead tongue. How do you know the words of the first speakers? Who are you? What are you? Marcus raised his hands peacefully, confused by her reaction. I'm just a freight hauler. I don't know what language that was. I was just trying to repeat what you said. The translator relayed his words, and the being's expression changed from fear to something approaching awe. She stood slowly, still wrapped in his emergency blanket, and studied him with those piercing violet eyes. You speak the true language without training, without preparation. Your species. What do you call yourselves? Human. Marcus replied simply. The word seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She staggered, then began speaking rapidly to herself in her own language. The translator was working better now, catching fragments. The prophecies spoke of, but it cannot be. The third cycle approaches. She turned back to him, and Marcus was surprised to see tears streaming down her face. Human Marcus Chen, freight hauler of the merchant vessel Wandering Star. She paused, tilting her head as if listening to something he couldn't hear. You carry something that belongs to my people. A package sealed by the council before the fall. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. How do you know about my cargo? How do you know my name or my ship? She smiled sadly, and for a moment she looked incredibly old despite her youthful appearance. Because I am Lyra Lee of the House of Memory, last daughter of Etheria, and I have been waiting in stasis for 3,000 of your years for someone like you to arrive. The package you carry contains the genetic heritage of my entire species, the last hope for our restoration. And you, impossible human who speaks the tongue of gods, are the key to everything. The ship around them suddenly came alive, lights blazing and systems humming with power. Through the transparent walls, Marcus could see other vessels beginning to emerge from hyperspace, sleek, predatory shapes that made his cargo hauler look like a child's toy. The Devourers have found us, Lirelai whispered, her face pale with terror. We must reach your ship and complete the delivery. The package must reach Kepler 442 before they can stop us, or my people will remain extinct forever. As alarms began blaring and the first energy weapons lit up the darkness of space, Marcus realized his simple delivery run had just become something much more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Marcus grabbed Lirelai's hand and ran toward the airlock where his ship was docked. Behind them, the ancient vessel shuddered as enemy fire struck its hull. The Devourers, sleek black ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, had formed a hunting formation around them, their weapons charging with an ominous red glow. Your ship cannot outrun them, Lyra Lee said as they reached the airlock. Her alien features were tense with worry, but she moved with fluid grace despite having just awakened from 3,000 years of stasis. The Devourers are purpose-built hunters. They have been searching for any trace of Etherian technology for millennia. Maybe not, Marcus replied, sealing the airlock behind them and rushing to the bridge. But the Wandering Star has a few tricks that might surprise them. He threw himself into the pilot's seat and began the emergency undocking procedure. Strap yourself in somewhere. This is going to get rough. Lirelai found a secure position and watched as Marcus's hands flew over the controls. The cargo hauler detached from the alien vessel, just as a massive energy beam sliced through the space they'd occupied moments before. The ancient Etherian ship began to break apart under the sustained assault, its dying systems flickering like a fading star. They're destroying the ship, Lirelai whispered, pain evident in her voice. That vessel was the last remnant of our golden age, a library ship containing millions of years of accumulated knowledge. Marcus felt her grief, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. 3 Devourer vessels were already moving to intercept them, their black hulls rippling with weapon arrays. His ship's computer was screaming warnings about targeting locks and incoming missiles. Hold on, Marcus muttered, and pushed the Wandering Star into a desperate acceleration burn toward the nearest asteroid field. The old engines protested but delivered, throwing both occupants back into their seats as the ship shot forward at maximum thrust. The Devourers followed, their sleek forms cutting through space like knives. They were faster than Marcus's ship, but the asteroid field ahead would level the playing field. At least that's what he hoped. You know how to fly, Lirelai observed, gripping her seat as they plunged into the chaotic maze of tumbling rocks. This is not the skill of a simple freight hauler. Marcus didn't answer immediately, too busy threading the ship between 2 massive asteroids while Devourer fire lit up the space around them. I used to be military, he said finally. Fighter pilot during the Proxima Wars. Got tired of shooting people and switched to moving cargo instead. That admission seemed to surprise her. A warrior who chose peace. That is unexpected among your species. You know about humans? Marcus asked, pulling the ship into a sharp turn that scraped their hull against an asteroid's surface. Behind them, one of the pursuing Devourers wasn't as lucky. It clipped a rock and spun out of control, buying them precious seconds. My people have been watching your species since you first ventured beyond your home system, Lirelai replied. We have observed your conflicts, your expansion, your remarkable adaptability, but we have never made contact because... She paused as if searching for the right words. Because we were dying. and our presence would have brought only danger to your young civilization. Another Devourer ship rounded an asteroid directly ahead of them, weapons charging. Marcus cursed and threw the ship into a barrel roll, but there wasn't enough room to maneuver. They were about to be caught in a crossfire when something unexpected happened. The asteroid they'd just passed suddenly cracked and split apart, creating a debris field that forced the enemy ship to retreat. "How did—" Marcus began, then looked at Lyrelei. Her eyes were closed and her hands were pressed against the ship's bulkhead. A faint blue glow emanated from her fingertips. "You did that." "Etherian technology responds to our mental patterns," she explained, opening her eyes. "Your ship has been exposed to our energy signatures for several hours now. I can influence certain systems, though it requires great concentration." Marcus filed that information away for later. Right now they needed to escape the asteroid field and reach the hyperspace jump point. But the remaining Devourers had regrouped and were closing in from multiple directions. His ship's shields were already down to 60%, and they hadn't even made it halfway through the field. "There," Lyrelei pointed at a small gap between two spinning asteroids. "If you can reach that space, I can do something that might help us escape." Marcus didn't question her. He aimed the ship at the narrow opening and pushed the engines past their safety limits. The wandering star shot through the gap with meters to spare, emerging into a relatively clear area of space just as the Devourers reached firing range. "Now!" Lyrelei shouted. She pressed both hands flat against the ship's hull and closed her eyes in concentration. The blue glow around her hands intensified, spreading across the bulkheads like veins of light. Suddenly, Marcus felt the ship change, not physically but somehow fundamentally. The engines hummed with new power, the shields strengthened, and the navigation computer began showing readings he'd never seen before. "Impossible," he breathed, watching their speed indicator climb beyond anything the ship should have been capable of. "We're going twice our maximum velocity." "Etherian enhancement," Lyrelei explained, though the effort was clearly draining her. "I'm temporarily upgrading your ship's systems using our biotechnology. It won't last long, but it should be enough to reach the hyperspace point." The Devourers fell behind as the enhanced wandering star raced toward the edge of the system. But Marcus could see more enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace ahead of them. They were being herded into a trap. "They're trying to cut us off," he said grimly. "Even with your enhancement, we can't fight that many ships." Lyrelei's expression was determined despite her obvious exhaustion. "We don't need to fight them. We just need to reach Kepler 442. The package you carry contains more than just genetic material. It holds the key to awakening the Guardians." Guardians? Ancient Etherian defense systems, sleeping in the depths of space since the fall. "If we can deliver the package to its destination and activate the awakening sequence—" She smiled for the first time since he'd found her. "The Devourers will discover that they are not the apex predators they believe themselves to be." The hyperspace jump point was finally in range, but a massive Devourer battleship had positioned itself directly in their path. Its weapon arrays were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, energy projectors that seemed to warp space itself around their target. "That's a Void Reaper," Lyrelei whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "They use those ships to harvest entire planets. We cannot face it directly." Marcus studied the tactical display, his old military training kicking in. The battleship was massive and powerful, but it was also slow and predictable. If he could time it just right— "Trust me," he said, and angled the ship directly at the Void Reaper. Lyrelei gripped her seat as Marcus pushed their enhanced engines to absolute maximum. They shot toward the enemy battleship like a bullet, weapons fire lighting up space around them. At the last possible second, Marcus cut power and let their momentum carry them forward while he activated every maneuvering thruster the ship had. The wandering star spun end over end, sliding underneath the massive battleship's hull and emerging on the other side, just as the hyperspace jump point activated. In the distance, Marcus could see more Devourer ships converging on their position, but it was too late. "Jump coordinates locked in," he announced, his hand hovering over the activation control. "Next stop, Kepler 442. As space twisted around them and the stars elongated into lines, Marcus caught a glimpse of Lyrelei's face in the reflected light. She was smiling with something that might have been hope, and for the first time since this insane adventure began, he started to believe they might actually succeed. But in the depths of space behind them, something ancient and terrible was stirring. Drawn by the use of Etherian technology for the first time in 3 millennia, the Devourers were just the beginning. The journey through hyperspace usually took Marcus 3 days, but with Lyrelai's enhancement still affecting his ship's systems, they arrived at Kepler 442 in less than 18 hours. The blue glow that had spread through the ship's bulkheads was fading now, and Lyrelai looked exhausted from maintaining the upgrades for so long. "You should rest," Marcus suggested as they dropped back into normal space. The star system ahead looked exactly as he remembered from his navigation charts. A yellow dwarf star with 7 planets, the third of which was his destination. "I cannot rest yet," Lyrelai replied, though she was clearly struggling to stay upright. "There are things you must understand before we reach the surface. About the package you carry, about my people, and about what the Devourers really want." Marcus set the ship on autopilot toward Kepler 442c and turned to face her. During their escape, he'd been too busy flying to really process what was happening. But now questions were flooding his mind. "Start with why you've been waiting 3,000 years for a human to show up." Lyrelai settled into the co-pilot's chair and gazed out at the approaching planet. "My people were once the most advanced civilization in this galaxy. We had transcended the need for physical technology by merging our consciousness with living vessels like the one you found me in. But our advancement came at a cost. We became too focused on knowledge and contemplation, too removed from the physical universe." She paused, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight. The Devourers arose from the dark spaces between galaxies, creatures of pure hunger that consume not just matter and energy, but information itself. They feed on civilizations, devouring their knowledge, their culture, their very essence. When they found us, we were unprepared for such primitive, brutal warfare. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "They wiped out your entire species." "Nearly. In the final days before our civilization fell, the Council of Memory enacted a desperate plan. They scattered seed packages across the galaxy, genetic templates, cultural memories, and most importantly, the awakening codes for our ancient Guardian network. Each package was programmed to activate only when touched by a specific linguistic pattern, a phrase from the true language that only certain individuals would be able to speak correctly." "And I'm one of those individuals?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand the implications. "More than that," Lyrelai said softly. "Humans are the only species we've encountered who can naturally vocalize the true language without technological assistance. Your vocal cords, your brain structure, even your genetic patterns seem specifically designed to interact with Etherian systems. It's as if—" She trailed off, looking uncomfortable, but Marcus pressed her. "As if what?" "As if your species was created to be our successors." The words hung in the air between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Marcus stared at her, trying to process what she was suggesting. "You're saying humans were engineered by your people?" "Not engineered," Lyrelai corrected quickly. "Guided, perhaps. Influenced during key moments in your evolution. There are records in the deep archives of Etherian observers present at crucial points in human development. When your ancestors first developed language, when they began using tools, when they reached for the stars." Marcus's mind reeled. Everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the universe was suddenly in question. "Why? Why would your people do that?" "Because the Devourers cannot be defeated by advanced technology or superior firepower," she explained. "They adapt to and consume anything that follows predictable patterns. But humans are chaotic, unpredictable, capable of impossible feats when properly motivated. Your species has something the Devourers cannot understand or replicate. What you call the human spirit." The ship's proximity alarms chimed, indicating they were approaching their destination. Marcus looked at the tactical display and frowned. "That's strange. I'm reading multiple ships in orbit around the planet, but they're not showing up on any identification systems." Lyrelai leaned forward to study the readings, and her face went pale. "Those are Devourer scout ships. They've found the delivery point. How is that possible? They couldn't have beaten us here." "They didn't need to," she said grimly. "They've been systematically searching for the seed packages for 3,000 years. This was always a race against time." She stood up, moving toward the cargo hold. "We need to get the package to the surface immediately before they can stop us." Marcus followed her, his mind still spinning from her revelations about humanity's origins. In the cargo hold, The sealed container sat exactly where he'd left it, unremarkable except for the faint humming sound it had been making since they escaped the asteroid field. "The package is responding to my presence," Lyrelai explained, touching the container's surface. Immediately, symbols began appearing on its surface, flowing organic shapes that seemed to move and shift as Marcus watched them. "The awakening sequence has already begun. What exactly happens when we deliver this thing?" Marcus asked. "If we succeed, the Guardian Network will reactivate and begin seeding new Etherian colonies throughout the galaxy. My people will have a chance to rebuild, to learn from our past mistakes, and to stand with humanity against the Devourer threat. If we fail," she looked at him with those incredible violet eyes, "the Devourers will add Earth to their list of consumed worlds and the universe will become a much darker place." The ship shuddered as energy beams struck their hull. Through the viewports, Marcus could see the sleek black forms of Devourer fighters moving to intercept them. But something else caught his attention. Massive shapes rising from the planet's surface. Ancient structures that hadn't been there when he'd first scanned the system. "The planetary defenses are activating," Lyrelai said with wonder in her voice. "The package is close enough now to trigger the dormant systems, but we still need to reach the central chamber to complete the awakening sequence." Marcus strapped the package to his back and headed for the ship's emergency shuttle. "Then that's what we'll do. Fair warning, though. I've never been good at backing down from a fight, even when the odds are impossible." Lyrelai smiled, and for a moment she looked less like an ancient alien and more like a young woman, facing the greatest challenge of her life. "That's exactly why the Council chose humans as our inheritors. Your species has a remarkable talent for achieving the impossible." As they launched from the cargo hold in the small shuttle, Marcus couldn't help but think about the strange turns his life had taken. He'd been a fighter pilot, then a freight hauler, and now he was apparently the key to resurrecting an extinct alien civilization. Behind them, the Wandering Star automatically engaged its defense systems and began trading fire with the Devourer scouts, buying them precious time to reach the surface. Ahead, the ancient structures on Kepler 442c continued rising from the ground, reaching toward the stars like fingers of light. Whatever happened next, Marcus knew that the universe would never be the same. And somehow that didn't scare him as much as it should have. Maybe Lyrelai was right about the human spirit. Maybe they really were meant for this moment. The shuttle screamed through the atmosphere toward its destiny, carrying the last hope of two civilizations in its cargo bay. The shuttle touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering crystal spires that hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus had expected an empty planet, but Kepler 442c was very much alive. The ground pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that responded to their presence, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. "The entire planet is a single organism," Lyrelai explained as they gathered their equipment. "A living computer designed to house and protect the Guardian Network. It has been dormant for millennia, waiting for the awakening signal." Above them, Devourer dropships were descending through the atmosphere like black meteors. Marcus counted at least a dozen, each one capable of carrying a full squad of enemy troops. They had minutes, maybe less, before the surface would be crawling with hostiles. "How far to the central chamber?" he asked, shouldering the package and checking his sidearm. It was a standard energy pistol, completely inadequate against the kind of opposition they were about to face. But it made him feel marginally better. "The path will reveal itself," Lyrelai said, placing her hand on one of the crystal spires. Immediately, a line of soft blue light appeared in the ground, stretching away into the distance. "The planet recognizes my genetic signature and will guide us to our destination." They ran along the luminous trail as the first Devourer troops began deploying around them. Marcus got his first clear look at their enemies and immediately wished he hadn't. The Devourers were an unsettling mixture of organic and mechanical components, tall, thin creatures with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to be composed of constantly shifting shadows. Their weapons appeared to be grown rather than manufactured, pulsing with the same dark energy as their ships. "Don't let them touch you," Lyrelai warned as they ducked behind a cluster of crystal formations. "They feed by direct contact, absorbing memories and life force through their skin." A group of Devourers spotted them and opened fire. Their weapons didn't shoot energy beams or projectiles. Instead, they released waves of absolute darkness that seemed to devour light itself. Marcus grabbed Lyrelai and rolled behind cover as the void shot struck the crystals around them. leaving perfectly spherical holes in the otherwise indestructible material. Well, that's terrifying, Marcus muttered, returning fire with his energy pistol. To his surprise, the shots actually seemed to affect the Devourers, causing them to stagger and retreat. How is that possible? These are just standard ship's weapons. The planet is enhancing everything within its field of influence, Lyreley explained, adding her own strange weapon to the fight. It looked like a grown thing, all curves and organic surfaces, but it fired bolts of pure blue energy that sent the Devourers fleeing. Your weapons are being upgraded to fight entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. They continued along the glowing path, fighting running battles with increasing numbers of Devourer troops. The planet itself seemed to be helping them. Crystal barriers rose from the ground to provide cover, paths shifted to confuse their pursuers, and the very air began to interfere with enemy communications. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they reached their destination. The central chamber was a vast cavern carved from a single enormous crystal, its walls covered in flowing script that hurt to look at directly. At the center of the space stood a pedestal surrounded by rotating rings of energy, clearly the focal point for the awakening sequence. This is it, Lyreley breathed, approaching the pedestal with something approaching reverence. The heart of memory, where the Council encoded the essence of our civilization. Place the package in the central ring and speak the activation phrase. Marcus unslung the container and moved toward the pedestal, but something made him pause. What activation phrase? You never taught me any activation phrase. Lyreley smiled sadly. Because you already know it. You spoke it when you first found me, before the translator could function. Trust your instincts, Marcus Chen. Trust the part of you that was designed for this moment. Before Marcus could respond, the chamber filled with the sound of grinding stone and screaming metal. Devourer troops were pouring through the entrances, their weapons already charging. But these weren't regular soldiers. These were hunter-killers, elite units encased in organic armor that made them look like living nightmares. Place the package, Lyreley shouted, raising her weapon and firing into the advancing horde. I'll hold them off. Marcus ran to the pedestal and set the container in the center ring. Immediately, the device began to dissolve, revealing its contents, a sphere of pure light that pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. But the sphere wasn't moving toward the energy rings. It was just hovering there, waiting. The phrase, Lyreley called out, her weapon fire becoming increasingly desperate as the hunter-killers pressed closer. Remember what you said. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to recall that moment in the derelict ship. Lyreley had been speaking in her musical language, and he had repeated something without understanding what it meant. The words came back to him now, not as sounds but as feelings, as if they were encoded in his DNA. Ethon Veltar Nathium, he said, and immediately felt the wrongness in his pronunciation. The sphere flickered but didn't respond. A hunter-killer broke through Lyreley's defense line and charged toward the pedestal. Its claws extended and dripping with the same void darkness as their weapons. Marcus drew his sidearm and fired, but the creature barely slowed. It was almost within reach when understanding flooded through him. The true language wasn't just words. It was emotion, intention, the fundamental vibrations of consciousness itself. He had to feel the meaning, not just speak the sounds. Ethan Veltarnathium, he cried out, putting all his hope, all his determination, all his very human refusal to give up into the ancient words. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The sphere of light exploded outward, filling the chamber with radiance that sent the hunter-killers shrieking and fleeing. The energy rings around the pedestal began spinning faster and faster, and Marcus could feel something vast and ancient awakening in the depths of space. It's working, Lyreley laughed, tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched the Guardian network come online. Marcus, you've done it. The Guardians are awakening across the galaxy. Through the crystal walls, Marcus could see pillars of light erupting from the planet's surface, reaching out to touch corresponding beacons on distant worlds. Each connection sparked new activity as dormant Etherian installations powered up for the first time in 3,000 years. But their celebration was cut short as something massive began descending from orbit. Oh, Dévoué Harvester ship, one of their world killers. The vessel was so large it blotted out the sun, and Marcus could already feel the temperature beginning to drop as it prepared to drain the planet's energy. The awakening sequence isn't complete, Lyreley said, her expression suddenly grim. The Guardians are online, but they need time to achieve full activation. That harvester will destroy the planet before they can defend themselves. Marcus looked at the sphere of light, still pulsing in the center of the energy rings. An idea was forming in his mind, crazy, impossible, but perhaps just human enough to work. What if we don't wait for the Guardians to save us? He asked. What if we save them instead? Marcus stared at the sphere of light pulsing in the energy rings, while the harvester ship's shadow fell across the planet like a dark omen. Above them, he could hear the deep thrumming of the vessel's drain beams beginning to charge. Weapons, capable of stripping a world down to its core and consuming every scrap of matter and energy. Guardian Network was designed to be controlled by Etherian consciousness, Lyrelai said, understanding immediately what he was considering. No other species has ever attempted to interface directly with our technology at this level. But humans can speak your language naturally, Marcus replied, moving closer to the sphere. And you said we were guided to be your successors. Maybe that guidance went deeper than just language. The chamber shook as the harvester's preliminary scans began. Through the crystal walls, Marcus could see the other Devourer ships withdrawing to a safe distance. They knew what was coming and wanted to be clear of the destruction zone. The risk is enormous, Lyrelai warned. If you attempt to merge your consciousness with the Guardian Network and fail, the feedback could destroy not just your mind, but the entire awakening sequence. We would lose everything. Marcus smiled grimly. Lady, I've been hauling freight across the galaxy for 12 years because I was too stubborn to stay in one place and too restless to settle down. Taking impossible risks is kind of what I do. He reached toward the sphere of light, then paused. If this works, what happens to me? Lyrelai's expression was pained. I don't know. The Etherian who last interfaced with the Guardian Network transcended physical existence entirely. They became one with the cosmic web of information that connects all life in the universe. It's not death, but it's not the life you've known either. The chamber shuddered again, more violently this time. Marcus could feel the temperature dropping rapidly as the harvester began its work. They had minutes before the planet's life support systems failed completely. Then I guess I'll find out, Marcus said, and plunged his hand into the sphere of light. The sensation was indescribable. Every nerve in his body suddenly carried information about distant stars, alien civilizations, the flow of time itself across the galaxy. Marcus felt his consciousness expanding beyond the confines of his skull, reaching out through the quantum threads that connected all existence. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was going to lose himself entirely in the vast network of Etherian knowledge. The accumulated wisdom of millions of years threatened to overwhelm his merely human mind. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of being consumed by the alien thoughts, Marcus felt them organizing themselves around his own personality, his own memories, his own stubborn human perspective. Impossible, he heard Lyrelai whisper, her voice seeming to come from very far away. He's not being absorbed by the network. He's teaching it to think like a human. Marcus could feel it too. The Guardian systems across the galaxy were awakening with a new kind of consciousness, not the serene, contemplative awareness of the original Etherians, but something more chaotic, more determined, more willing to fight dirty when necessary. They were learning from him, incorporating human patterns of thought and decision-making into their ancient protocols. Through the network, Marcus sensed the harvester ship above them, its massive bulk preparing to deliver the killing blow to the planet. But he also sensed something the Devourers didn't know about. Guardian installations throughout the galaxy were now operational and angry. Very angry. Time to show these things what humanity brings to the party, Marcus thought, and reached out through the network. The response was immediate and devastating. Guardian ships that had been dormant for 3 millennia suddenly materialized throughout the solar system. Not the elegant organic vessels of the original Etherians, but something new. These ships were angular, aggressive, built for war rather than exploration. They moved with human tactical thinking but powered by Etherian technology that defied physical laws. The Devourer Harvester found itself surrounded by 50 Guardian vessels, each one broadcasting a simple message in perfect Devourer linguistic patterns. This is our galaxy now. Leave immediately or be destroyed. Marcus felt a savage satisfaction as he watched the enemy ship's confusion through the network sensors. The Devourers had spent 3,000 years hunting the peaceful Etherians. creatures who fought only in defense and always sought diplomatic solutions. They had no experience dealing with Etherian technology guided by human aggression and creativity. The Devourers made their choice quickly. The Harvester's weapons powered up and fired at the nearest Guardian ship, expecting to easily destroy what they assumed was another pacifist vessel. Instead, the Guardian ship absorbed the attack completely, converted the energy into its own systems, and returned fire with weapons that tore rifts in spacetime itself. The Harvester's shields, designed to withstand any conventional weapon, crumpled like paper before the reality-warping assault. "Retreat," Marcus heard the Devourer commander broadcasting on all frequencies. "Unknown hostile force. All units retreat to safe distance." But the Guardian ships weren't content to simply drive off the attackers. With human tactical doctrine now integrated into their systems, they pursued the fleeing Devourers, systematically hunting down and destroying the entire invasion fleet. Within minutes, the space around Kepler 442 was empty, except for expanding clouds of debris. Through the network, Marcus could sense Guardian installations across the galaxy coming online, and immediately beginning aggressive patrols of their sectors. The Devourers had become the hunted instead of the hunters. "Marcus," Lyra Lee's voice called to him across the quantum static. "You're still connected to your physical form. That should be impossible. The network interface was designed to completely transfer consciousness." Marcus tried to focus on his body and found that she was right. He could feel his hand still touching the sphere of light, could sense his physical presence in the crystal chamber, but he was also simultaneously aware of Guardian operations across thousands of star systems. "I think," he said, surprised to hear his own voice still working normally, "that humans might be a bit more adaptable than your people expected." Slowly, carefully, Marcus began to withdraw his consciousness from the network. It was like trying to compress an ocean into a teacup. All that cosmic awareness had to somehow fit back into his merely human brain. But gradually, with Lirelai's help, he managed to pull himself back to normal awareness. When he opened his eyes, he found himself still standing in the crystal chamber, hand extended toward the sphere of light. But the sphere was different now. Instead of pure Etherian energy, it pulsed with something new, a hybrid pattern that was both alien and unmistakably human. "The network is stable," Lirelai reported, studying readings from instruments that had appeared around the chamber. "The Guardian installations are operating at full capacity and maintaining aggressive patrol patterns. The Devourers won't be able to mount another large-scale attack for centuries, if ever." Marcus nodded, then sat down heavily as the full impact of what they'd accomplished hit him. "So what now? Your people can rebuild. The Devourers are on the run, and humans apparently just inherited the most advanced defense network in the galaxy." Lyra Leigh smiled, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked truly hopeful. "Now we begin the real work, teaching two very different species how to work together as partners rather than predecessor and successor. The universe is about to become a much more interesting place." Outside the chamber, Marcus could hear the sound of shuttles landing, rescue teams from his cargo ship, which had somehow survived the battle and was now being escorted to the surface by Guardian vessels. The impossible delivery was complete, but Marcus had the feeling that his real adventure was just beginning. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed orbital station above Kepler 442c, watching as the latest batch of human and Etherian hybrid ships conducted training exercises in the void between worlds. The vessels moved with a grace that was purely alien combined with tactical patterns that were unmistakably human, the perfect fusion of two very different approaches to spaceflight. "The integration is proceeding faster than anyone anticipated," Lirelai said, joining him at the viewport. She looked different now, healthier, more vibrant, her pale blue skin glowing with an inner light that spoke of a species reborn. Around her neck, she wore a pendant made from metal salvaged from the wandering star, a reminder of the day a simple freight delivery changed the fate of two civilizations. "Maybe that's because both our species are more adaptable than we gave ourselves credit for," Marcus replied. In his hand, he held reports from Guardian stations across the galaxy, each one telling the same story of successful cooperation between human crews and Etherian technology. "Though I have to admit I never expected to become an admiral in an interspecies defense force. The promotion had been inevitable once word spread about what had happened at Kepler 442. Earth's government had initially been skeptical of the whole story until Guardian ships began appearing in human space, offering protection against threats that most people hadn't even known existed. Now, 6 months later, the Human-Etherian Alliance controlled the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. The Council of Memory has reached a decision about the reconstruction, Lyreley announced, her voice carrying a note of excitement. We're going to establish new colonies throughout the galaxy, but not as isolated Etherian settlements. Instead, we want to create joint communities where humans and my people can live and work together. Marcus nodded approvingly. It was exactly the kind of bold thinking that the hybrid Guardian network seemed to encourage. And the Devourers? Any word from the deep space monitoring stations? They've retreated to the dark spaces between galaxies, Lyreley reported. Our intelligence suggests they're rebuilding, adapting to the new reality of organized resistance. But they won't be able to mount another major offensive for decades, perhaps centuries. That was the best they could hope for. The Devourers hadn't been destroyed. Creatures that had survived for millions of years weren't going to be eliminated by a single defeat, no matter how decisive. But they had been shown that their era of unchallenged dominance was over. There is something else, Lyreley continued, her expression becoming more serious. The deep archive scans have revealed evidence of other extinct civilizations, species that fell to the Devourers before we did. Their seed packages are still out there, waiting for the right combination of circumstances to awaken them. Marcus felt a familiar stirring of excitement, the same restless energy that had driven him to become a freight hauler in the first place. How many other species are we talking about? At least 17 that we've identified so far, possibly more. Each one represents a unique perspective, a different approach to consciousness and existence. If we could awaken them all, create a true galactic alliance, we'd have the diversity and unpredictability to keep the Devourers off balance permanently, Marcus finished. It was an audacious plan, the kind of impossible dream that humans specialized in pursuing. I assume you're not suggesting we sit back and wait for these packages to activate themselves. Lyreley smiled, and Marcus was reminded of why he'd been willing to risk everything to help her. Actually, I was hoping you might be interested in another delivery job. The pay is terrible, the destinations are unknown, and the cargo is potentially dangerous to handle. Sounds like exactly my kind of job, Marcus replied without hesitation, though I think we're going to need a bigger ship. As if summoned by his words, a new vessel rose from the planet's surface, a hybrid creation that combined the organic elegance of Etherian biotechnology with the robust practicality of human engineering. The ship was beautiful in an alien way, but it also looked like it could punch through a brick wall if necessary. The Wandering Star 2, Lyreley announced, designed specifically for long-range exploration and recovery missions. She can survive anything the galaxy throws at her, adapt to unknown environments, and carry enough firepower to discourage unwanted attention. Marcus studied the approaching ship and felt a deep sense of rightness. This was what he'd been meant for, not just hauling cargo between established routes, but venturing into the unknown to bring hope to the lost and forgotten. When do we launch? The first package has been located in the Andromeda approach, Lyreley said, calling up a star chart that showed a region of space notorious for its dangerous anomalies and hostile conditions. The signals are very faint, suggesting the species in question may have been dormant for even longer than my people. Then we'd better get moving, Marcus said, heading for the shuttle bay. No telling what other forces might be looking for these packages now that word is spreading about the successful awakening. As they boarded the shuttle that would take them to their new ship, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. 6 months ago, he'd been a lonely freight hauler with no purpose beyond the next delivery. Now he was part of something larger, a mission to restore life and diversity to a galaxy that had been growing darker with each passing century. The Wandering Star 2 was everything Lyreley had promised, and more. The bridge seamlessly blended human and Etherian design principles, creating a workspace that felt both familiar and wondrously alien. Marcus settled into the captain's chair and felt the ship's hybrid consciousness touch the edges of his mind. Not invasive like the Guardian network had been, but more like a friendly greeting from a trusted partner. Destination set, Lyreley reported from the navigation station. Andromeda approach bearing 197 Mark IV. Estimated travel time at maximum hybrid drive, 3 weeks. Then let's go wake up some more neighbors, Marcus said, and gave the order to launch. As the ship accelerated away from Kepler 442, Marcus watched the hybrid Guardian vessels falling into escort formation around them. The galaxy was vast, full of mysteries and dangers, but for the first time in millennia it was also full of hope. Somewhere out there, 17 extinct civilizations were waiting to be reborn, and Marcus Chen, former freight hauler turned keeper of lost worlds, was going to make sure they got their chance. The universe was about to become a much more crowded place, and given what humanity and the Etherians had accomplished together, that was exactly what it needed to stay free.